Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Building Subtext. Last week I talked about developing the 4 through lines, and this week I want to go over some additions I did to make that even easier. One of the main reasons why I built subtext is to scale myself. If there's one thing I love more than anything else, it's helping people write great stories. But unfortunately, there's only so many hours in a day. So that's why I built subtext. So part of what I added this week was a way to give you a better idea of what it means to illustrate different through lines. If we come into here and I just pop into stories, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Thor Ragnarok, which is one of the better Marvel movies. And the nice thing about Thor is that it has a very typical narrative structure. The personality of the film is typical to a westernized culture storytelling. And if you're not sure exactly why those are important, I have other videos that go over that. But the objective story is the plot. The main character is what conflict looks like from the first person point of view. The influence character is what it looks like to see somebody else and their point of view. And then the relationship is typically the relationship between the two. And what I added this week, which was really important, particularly when it comes to any work that you do with subtext and anytime you ever want to use the dramatic theory of story, is that this isn't what the main character thinks they want or need, that kind of stuff. When they sing an I Want song, that's not what this is about, although sometimes it kind of sort of shows up in that. What these 4 things really are describing are what you as the author are recognizing as the conflict in the story. So I added illustrate how you see saving something you love as a source of conflict for everyone. And that makes sense for Thor, because if I bring it up, everything that's going on, trying to save Asgard and trying to make sure everything remains the same, that is going to create a ton of conflict for everyone. Obviously, I'm seeing it as I'm analyzing it, and that's when anybody talks about, well, Dramatica is great for only analysis, it's not great for creativity. Well, yeah, that's because you're taking an objective viewpoint of somebody else's work and it works great, which is what you really need when you're actually writing a story, is an objective look at it. So why wouldn't you want to use that to also inspire you to greater creativity? Because it's basically just getting somebody else to read your story without having to search out somebody to actually read through your work. And what I did was I added this cue just to remind you that this isn't how the characters are seeing it. They're going to talk about occasionally, maybe saving something that they love or whatever it is that they're going after, but it's really you as the author. What is it that you're seeing as conflict? For the main character, illustrate how you see assuring a group's future as a source of conflict for the main character. And that kind of sort of ties into the saving something you love. They're very similar. And that's because when it comes to the West, we like to think of the future and obtaining as almost the same sort of thing. We kind of blend the two of them together. Thor here assuring everyone's future, I'm going to see that as conflict because he's always trying to make sure that there's a future for everything, which also involves saving something you love. But not everybody in here is also looking towards the future. Really, that's coming from a first person point of view here. Then when we get to the influence character, which is Valkyrie, this is somebody who is influencing or challenging the main characters to see things from a different point of view. Illustrate how you see the influence character creating conflict through rejecting a group. So she's constantly rejecting and kind of doing her own thing. And that eventually challenges him to give up trying to fix everything and to basically let it go. And then finally, their relationship. Illustrate how you see relationships growing through converging with someone. So I really like these cues about illustrate how you as the author, see this as opposed to what does it feel like to be within their shoes? Because there's a million different story structure ideas that talk about that stuff. And the problem with those things is they're all subjective and they are given and prone to all the biases that go with subjectivity. So I would ignore those as much as you possibly can. Because really, you know what to do when it comes to writing subjectively, anyways. That's why you want to write. These are really pretty easy to understand because, again, we've seen them a million times. Star Wars, The Matrix, any action adventure, Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's almost always objective story with obtaining a main character with future and an influence character in the subconscious. But then you may be thinking, like, what the heck do you mean by influence character in the subconscious? And that's where I've added this help feature here. Subtext goes out and it looks for all the films that have an illustration of an influence character concern of subconscious. And it just so happens because most Western film is in the same area, there's a lot more examples here. But this one is from Pretty Woman, and the Richard Gere character here, his influence character concern of subconscious is all about being greedy. It's his fixed point of view, doesn't care about anything else but money, and that's what's challenging the Julia Roberts character to grow. Another version of an influence character conservative subconscious is being passionate. Professor Marsden in the Wonder Woman, here Olive, and also the husband William, they're very passionate about what it is that they believe in, and it's their undying love and steadfast resolve that eventually challenges the main character Elizabeth to grow and abandon her need to restrain herself. Here we have David Mills, Mr. Pitt from Seven, and you'll notice these are all very different genres. This is a comic book movie. This is a romantic comedy. This is a psychological sort of relationship drama. And this is a horrific thriller. They all are very completely different genres, but the personality of them, what it is that they're focusing on as the source of conflict in these stories, is the same. And they're looking at it from the same perspective. And this perspective shifts. It's not the same for every story, but it just so happens in these four examples here, they're all the same. And so here, Brad Pitt's character, he's so given to anger, he challenges and influences the Morgan Freeman character to eventually lash out and strike out. So that's what subconscious means. And also, if you look at the relationship story, illustrate how you see relationships growing through converging with someone. Well, you might think like, okay, well, converging with someone, how does conflict work in that instance? Here we have an example from Seven. The relationship story through line between Somerset and Mills is more than a working one. It's a mentorship that experiences tension through different manners of thinking. So as they devolve, as they grow almost like apart from each other and devolve into something that's a little more primal, their relationship gets harder and harder to stay together. It creates more conflict between the two of them. And it's that devolving into essentially like becoming vengeance, like the two of them are getting into that place. That's what's causing them to grow almost like together and apart by the end of it. Thor converging with someone is a very typical Marvel thing where the relationship story is about teammates coming together and what is it like to come together and figure out who's going to play what role and who's going to fit into where. It's a key part to making that a much stronger comic book movie than most comic book movies. And then, of course, if you have trouble with understanding what the future is all about, as it's a point of view of conflict, which I don't think most people will, you can come in here in Pretty Woman, her conflict comes from the fact that she really has no future in this world. Like, it's not really her thing, and she always knows it. And it's the idea that whether or not that future is something that's ever set, what are the kind of conflicts that you run into because of that? And then Morgan Freeman in Seven has the classic, "Oh, I can't wait to retire. I'm done with this. I've only got 7 days left," or however many days he has left on the force. That is creating conflict within him personally. And I'm recognizing that as the quote unquote writer of the piece. And it may be that you don't actually need this help, like it makes complete sense to you. But there are other stories where it's not as clear cut and as simple as future obtaining, subconscious, and becoming. Maybe it's the same thing, but the perspectives have shifted. And that's what I want to show you with here, Do the Right Thing, which is a film that I recently uploaded to Subtext. If you come in here, we're going to go over the same four things of future, obtaining, subconscious, and becoming, but from different perspectives. Now, the objective story plot is all about the subconscious because that film is about hating people. The main character concern is finishing what you started. So now the main character has shifted out of future and into obtaining. The influence character, which is Sal, his boss, has moved out of subconscious and into becoming. So it's almost like everything just rotated one thing to the right. And their relationship now has moved into future. Illustrate how you see relationships growing through protecting one's future. You see how that's a very different feeling to the narrative. It's a completely different personality because those perspectives have shifted, but they're all equally balanced, which is why it feels so complete. So if you look at this and you think, well, how does that fit? I'm not really sure how hating someone, how does that create conflict? The nice thing about how I have it set up here in subtext is if you find an illustration or a story point that you really aren't connecting with, that you don't really understand, what you can do is you can actually instantaneously copy in what is here in the example into your story. So what I've done here is I've opened up a different narrative, one that's much closer to films like Inception or Aliens or Blade Runner 2049, films that are a little heavier as opposed to something like Thor or Pretty Woman, which is a little lighter. It's in a completely different area thematically. And typically, this is an area of the structural model that some writers have difficulty understanding. So if you come in here into the relationship story concern, it says, illustrate how you see relationships growing through figuring out how something works. Now, the thing underneath it is conceptualizing. So imagine, how am I supposed to write about relationships growing through conceptualizing? That seems very alien and doesn't seem like something that would inspire a lot of creativity. But if we open up the example here, we get one from Inception because Inception has a relationship story concern of conceptualizing. That's how their marriage grows. It grows and dissolves, but it definitely does grow. And the example reads, we can figure out where we fit into each other's lives in order to feel that anticipation of excitement again, unless we shouldn't imagine far-fetched scenarios in order to not be distracted by what are now impossibilities. So that's a way of getting into the conflict and understanding it's the we perspective because it's a relationship, it's a bond between two people. And the idea that trying to outline a plan of action, trying to conceptualize to work through that is what will bring the relationship to a place where it will either come closer together or dissolve altogether. Another example, this is from Aliens, figuring out how to move on after a tragedy. Now, it also has a relationship story concern of conceptualizing. And again, that mother daughter relationship between Ripley and Newt that grows through them trying to figure out, well, we've both been through tragedy. How can we fit into each other's lives? Who's going to take care of who? Who's the mother? Who's the daughter? And it's not something that's actually talked about, but it is what is driving the narrative. It's the subtext underneath their relationship. The example says we can figure out a way to fulfill each other's needs in order to grow closer together, or we can imagine the worst that could happen to each other and stay apart for fear of being hurt. And you can feel the inequity in there in conceptualizing and trying to figure out, trying to envision how we're actually supposed to work together. Should we come closer? Should we pull apart? But always focused on conceptualizing. And then from Blade Runner 2049, which funny enough has the same exact story form as Aliens, in that one, the relationship story concern of conceptualizing are the plans for a life that they have together, which you can see that's pretty close to Inception. It's almost the same sort of thing. That's what gives it that heavy seriousness, cool Christopher Nolan, that sort of thing. Like, oh, what's going on here? What's really happening? Part of trying to understand what's going on is also trying to figure out how all the pieces fit together, and particularly in relationships, how do we blend ourselves together into one another. So here in Blade Runner 2049, planning a beautiful life together builds anticipation and draws us closer, while at the same time making it painfully clear that we come from two very different worlds. So again, it's the same relationship story concern inequity. It's that same source of conflict of conceptualizing, but the illustration is completely up to the artist. So if you find yourself with a relationship story concern of conceptualizing, maybe you likely knew where the plot was, it's a mystery. You knew where the main character was, they're in the past and they're being challenged by something from memory. But the relationship story is something that doesn't quite connect with you. You can look through here, and maybe the Aliens one is the one that's closest to what it is that could be in your story. So all you have to do is just click copy illustration. And what subtext does is it grabs that illustration, that example from Aliens, and just plops it into your story here. And then you can just go ahead and alter it to fit the different characters that are in your story. You can, change a little bit of it. You can leave it exactly as it is because no one is actually ever going to see this. This is really just for you as an author to always know what it is that is happening in this relationship so that you can actually write a story that fulfills this part of the narrative so that you tell a complete story. And these examples are available in every single story point. So here's the influence character concern of memory, and Newt is challenging Ripley by calling to mind and recalling horrific nightmares, which of course pulls from the first film. Here we have Blade Runner 2049, where she is recognizing someone. She's actually recognizing the very best she's programmed to, but she recognizes the best in Kay, in the replicant, and the fact that she's recognizing it, the actual truth behind where that's coming from, is what eventually challenges and influences Kay to accept his own programming. And then finally, Cobb's wife in Inception, she's always bringing back remembering what was lost. You should reflect on how great things were with someone in order to be admired again, unless you need to recognize the unreliability of memories. That's that whole speech at the end, in order to recognize the contempt someone has for you. And maybe that just grabs you and it's like, oh, I never thought that this could be a part of my story. You just tap copy illustration, it drops it right in there, and you're ready to go. So that's it for this week of building subtext. If you have any questions about this or how to incorporate it into your own story, leave me a comment below or contact me directly. Talk to you next time.